The morning of December 14th, 1861, dawned cold and grey over Windsor Castle. Prince Albert, the prince consort of Queen Victoria, lay dying of typhoid fever. His breathing had become laboured, rattling in his chest with each painful inhalation. The physicians who had attended him for weeks knew the end was near. In just hours he would be gone, leaving behind a grieving widow who would wear black for the remaining 40 years of her life. But 20 miles away, in the pastoral grounds of Kew Gardens, stood a modest Georgian residence that whispered of another story entirely, a tale of alleged secret liaisons, hidden children, and scandals that threatened the very foundation of the British monarchy. This is the story of Cambridge Cottage, a house whose elegant facade concealed rumours that would haunt the royal family for generations. A place where, according to whispers that circulated through Victorian London's drawing rooms and gentlemen's clubs, Prince Albert himself may have maintained a relationship far from the watchful eyes of his devoted wife. To understand how this seemingly innocent cottage became the epicenter of one of the monarchy's most persistent scandals, we must journey back to an era when reputation meant everything, and a single rumor could topple empires. If you find this exploration of hidden royal history intriguing, please consider subscribing to the channel. We delve into the forgotten corners of aristocratic life, the scandals that shaped dynasties, and the architectural witnesses to history's most compelling human dramas. Cambridge Cottage sits within the grounds of the Royal Botanic Gardens at Kew, in what is now the London borough of Richmond upon Thames. The house dates to the early 18th century, originally built around 1806 as a private residence in the Georgian style that defined British architecture of the era. Its architecture speaks of understated elegance rather than ostentatious grandeur. 3 stories of warm red brick, symmetrical sash windows arranged in perfect proportion, classical details that please the eye without overwhelming it. Unlike the vast palaces and sprawling estates associated with British royalty, Buckingham Palace with its 775 rooms, Windsor Castle with its 1,000-year history, Cambridge Cottage could almost be mistaken for a substantial country gentleman's home, the sort of residence a successful merchant or minor nobleman might build. The property takes its name from Adolphus Frederick, the first Duke of Cambridge, 7th son of King George III, who took up residence there in 1806. The Duke, born on February 24, 1774, at Buckingham House, was a military man who had served with distinction in the Hanoverian army during the tumultuous years of the Napoleonic Wars. He had seen combat in the Netherlands, had witnessed the revolutionary fervour that swept Europe, and had returned to England seeking peace after decades of conflict. When he sought a peaceful retreat away from the formalities of court life, away from the endless ceremonies and rigid protocols that defined royal existence, Cambridge Cottage provided exactly that sanctuary. The house itself measures approximately 12,000 square feet across its 3 floors, with 23 principal rooms, not counting the extensive service areas below stairs. The exterior presents a restrained, classical facade, red brick with Portland stone dressings around the windows and doors, tall sash windows that flood the interior with light, and a modest portico supported by 4 Doric columns marking the main entrance. The roof is topped with a delicate balustrade, and twin chimneys rise from either end, their smoke dispersing over the gardens. Nothing about its outward appearance suggests scandal or intrigue. Indeed, that was precisely its appeal. A house that could shelter privacy behind a facade of respectable ordinariness. Inside, the cottage followed the typical Georgian layout that had evolved to perfection by the early 19th century. The ground floor contained the principal reception rooms designed for the social life that defined upper-class existence. The drawing room, measuring 30 feet by 20, offered views over the gardens through 3 tall windows. The walls were covered in silk damask, the ceiling decorated with delicate plasterwork featuring floral motifs and classical medallions. A marble fireplace dominated one wall, its mantelpiece supporting Chinese porcelain vases and French ormolu clocks. The dining room, capable of seating 20 guests around its extending mahogany table, occupied the opposite corner of the house. Here, the Duke would entertain fellow officers, government ministers, and members of the extended royal family. The walls were painted a deep Pompeian red, fashionable at the time, and hung with paintings of classical ruins and Italian landscapes. A sideboard of carved mahogany held the household silver, salvers, candelabra, serving dishes bearing the Duke's coat of arms. The library lined one entire wall with mahogany bookcases reaching from floor to ceiling, accessible by a sliding ladder. Here the Duke kept his collection of military histories, philosophical treatises, and contemporary novels. A large partner's desk positioned before the window allowed him to conduct correspondence while looking out over the gardens, watching the seasons change the landscape. The morning room, a smaller, more intimate space, was where the ladies of the house might take their correspondence, receive informal visitors, or work at their needlework. It faced east, capturing the morning sun, and was furnished with delicate chairs and small tables in the lighter style that women preferred. The first floor housed the family bedrooms and private sitting rooms, spaces reserved for the intimate life of the household. The Duke's bedroom suite included a bedchamber, a dressing room where his valet would prepare his clothes and help him dress, and a private sitting room where he might retreat from even his own family. The Duchess had an equivalent suite, decorated in more feminine style with floral wallpapers and lighter furniture. The second floor was reserved for children's quarters, guest chambers, and the nursery where the Duke's children would spend their early years under the care of nurses and governesses. These rooms were simpler but still comfortable, with painted walls rather than expensive wallpapers, and furniture that could withstand the rough treatment of childhood. Below stairs, hidden from the view of visitors but essential to the functioning of the household, a warren of service rooms housed the kitchens with their massive coal-fired ranges, the scullery where maids scrubbed pots and dishes, the butler's pantry where the household silver was cleaned and stored, the housekeeper's room that served as headquarters for domestic management, and the servants' hall where the staff took their meals and spent their limited free time. The first Duke of Cambridge lived at the cottage with his wife, Princess Augusta of Hesse Castle, whom he had married on May 7, 1818, at the Queen's Palace, later renamed Buckingham Palace. The marriage produced 3 children who would play significant roles in royal history. George, born in 1819, who would inherit his father's title and become the center of scandal himself. Augusta, born in 1822, who would become the Grand Duchess of Mecklenburg-Strelitz through marriage, and Mary Adelaide, born in 1833, who would later become the Duchess of Teck and, significantly, the mother of Queen Mary, consort of King George V. When the first Duke of Cambridge died on July 8, 1850, at the age of 76, the cottage passed to his son, the second Duke of Cambridge. George William Frederick Charles, to give him his full imposing name, was born on March 26, 1819, and would live until March 17, 1904, serving as Commander-in-Chief of the British Army for an unprecedented 39 years, from 1856 to 1895. But it was during his tenure at Cambridge Cottage that the whispers began, that rumours took root and flourished in the fertile soil of Victorian scandal-mongering. To understand the allegations that would come to surround Cambridge Cottage, we must first understand the peculiar nature of scandal in Victorian Britain. This was an era of rigid moral codes publicly enforced, even as they were privately flouted on a massive scale. The Victorian period, stretching from 1837 to 1901, developed its own unique brand of hypocrisy, a society that proclaimed the highest moral standards while systematically violating them, that worshipped domesticity and female purity while maintaining a vast commercial sex industry, that celebrated marriage and family while tolerating widespread adultery among the upper classes. Queen Victoria herself set the tone. After Prince Albert's death in 1861, she became the embodiment of propriety, duty, and domestic virtue. She transformed widowhood into a kind of perpetual performance, wearing black for 40 years, maintaining Albert's rooms exactly as he left them, consulting his memory on every decision. The ideal of the royal family as paragons of moral rectitude became central to the monarchy's public image and social function. The Queen was not merely a political figure, but a moral exemplar, the nation's conscience made flesh. Yet beneath this veneer of respectability, Victorian society was rife with contradiction. Prostitution flourished in London on an industrial scale unprecedented in British history. By the 1850s, estimates suggested there were between 50,000 and 80,000 prostitutes working in London alone, serving a male population that publicly condemned such women while privately keeping them in business. These weren't just streetwalkers in slums. High-class courtesans occupied elegant townhouses in St. John's Wood and Mayfair, maintained by wealthy patrons who were often married men of impeccable social standing. Illegitimate children were commonplace among all classes, though acknowledged only in whispers. Parish records reveal that in some areas of London, nearly 40% of firstborn children were conceived before marriage. The poor resorted to baby farms and foundling hospitals. The wealthy sent their bastards to be raised quietly in the country, provided for but never acknowledged. Powerful men maintained mistresses, sometimes openly, more often in houses discreetly located in fashionable suburbs like St. John's Wood or Kew, where privacy could be purchased and discretion maintained. The hypocrisy was breathtaking in its scale and systematic nature. The same society that condemned fallen women devoured scandal sheets and gossip with insatiable appetite. Newspapers and magazines walked a careful line, reporting rumors without quite confirming them, using circumlocutions and euphemisms that allowed readers to understand perfectly well what was being suggested while maintaining deniability. A gentleman might be described as maintaining an irregular establishment or having complicated domestic arrangements. Everyone knew what this meant, but nothing could be proven. The royal family was not immune to this paradox. Indeed, precisely because they were held to such impossibly high standards, any hint of impropriety became magnified 100-fold. A rumor about a tradesman's infidelity might entertain a drawing room for an evening and then be forgotten. A rumor about a prince could destabilize a government, provide ammunition for Republicans, and undermine the entire institution of monarchy. Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's beloved husband, was particularly vulnerable to such speculation. A German prince born in the tiny duchy of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, he never fully won the affection of the British public during his lifetime. Many saw him as a foreign interloper, living off British wealth, influencing British policy through his wife. He was seen by some as cold and aloof, by others as overly intellectual and serious, by still others as excessively moral and priggish. He didn't hunt with the enthusiasm expected of British aristocracy, preferred music and art to sport and gambling, involved himself in social reform in ways that made the upper classes uncomfortable. This made him the perfect target for rumor-mongers who delighted in bringing the mighty low. If the sanctimonious German prince could be revealed as just another man with wandering appetites, if his pretensions to moral superiority could be punctured, what delicious satisfaction that would provide. The rumors that swirled around Cambridge Cottage must be understood in this context, as much about Victorian society's need to cut down those who claimed moral authority as about any actual behavior by Prince Albert. The precise origin of the rumors linking Prince Albert to Cambridge Cottage is lost to history, buried in the uncertain soil of gossip and innuendo that fertilized Victorian social life. No smoking gun has ever emerged from the archives, no diary entry confessing to secret visits, no love letters proving an illicit relationship, no payment records showing hush money or child support. What survives instead is the persistent whisper, the knowing glance exchanged between those in the know. The story passed from one generation to the next, with each teller adding their own embellishments and interpretations. According to these rumors, which began circulating in the late 1850s and intensified after Albert's death in 1861, Prince Albert maintained a relationship with a woman of uncertain identity who resided at or near Cambridge Cottage. Some versions of the story claim she was a lady-in-waiting at court, someone with legitimate access to royal circles who could meet the prince without raising immediate suspicion. Others insisted she was the wife of a courtier, carrying on an affair under her husband's unwitting nose. Still others suggested she was an actress or singer who had caught the prince's eye during a command performance, thereafter installed in a comfortable cottage where he could visit her discreetly. The lack of specificity in these stories is telling. It suggests that the rumor may have been embroidered and elaborated over decades, with each teller adding details that seemed plausible to their particular audience. The woman's identity shifted to suit the prejudices of whoever was telling the tale. If the audience was suspicious of the theatre, she became an actress. If they distrusted the morals of court ladies, she became a lady-in-waiting. If they believed in class-crossing romance, she became a simple country girl who caught a prince's heart. The most persistent and scandalous version of the rumor claims that this mysterious woman bore Prince Albert at least one child, possibly as many as 3. These illegitimate offspring were allegedly raised in secrecy, their true parentage known only to a select few trusted servants and officials. According to the gossips, substantial sums were paid from the privy purse, or from Albert's personal fortune, to ensure their silence and comfort, to provide the children with education and opportunities while maintaining the fiction that they were orphans or the children of minor gentry. Some versions added even more sensational details. The woman, it was whispered, had attempted to blackmail Prince Albert, threatening to expose their relationship unless she received a generous settlement. Others claimed that Queen Victoria herself knew of the arrangement and had tacitly approved it, preferring that her husband satisfy his needs discreetly rather than risking a more public scandal. Still others suggested that the whole affair had been orchestrated by government ministers who wanted some hold over the prince, some secret that would make him vulnerable to control. The location of Cambridge Cottage seemed to lend credence to these tales, providing what appeared to be circumstantial evidence of plausibility. Situated within the extensive grounds of Kew Gardens, it offered privacy and seclusion impossible to achieve in central London. The gardens themselves covered hundreds of acres by the 1860s, with numerous entrances and exits, winding paths through dense shrubbery, secluded groves and hidden corners. A carriage arriving after dark could easily go unnoticed by the handful of gardeners who locked the gates at sunset. The cottage was close enough to central London to be convenient, a mere 90-minute ride by carriage from Buckingham Palace, less if one went by train to Kew Bridge Station, yet far enough to provide discretion and separation from the constant surveillance of court life. Moreover, and this seemed particularly damning to Victorian gossips, the second Duke of Cambridge, who resided at the cottage from 1850 onwards, was himself a man of questionable morals by the rigid standards of the day. He had contracted what was known as a morganatic marriage, a marriage between partners of unequal social rank, in which the lower-ranking partner and any children are excluded from inheritance, to Sarah Fairbrother, an actress, in 1847. This union produced 3 sons whom the Duke could never legitimize under British law, who could never inherit his title or royal status, who existed in a kind of social limbo between respectability and disgrace. If the Duke himself was willing to flout convention so flagrantly, the reasoning went, might he not have provided cover for similar indiscretions by his royal cousin? Might Cambridge Cottage have served a dual purpose, as home to the Duke's illegal family and as safe house for Prince Albert's? The Duke, after all, owed his position and income to royal favour. What better way to ensure that favour than by facilitating the prince's private arrangements? The rumours proliferated and multiplied like bacteria in a culture medium. Each retelling added new details. Each version competed to be more scandalous than the last. By the late Victorian period, some versions had become so elaborate they bordered on fiction, with secret tunnels connecting Cambridge Cottage to other buildings in Kew Gardens, with disguises and assumed names, with mysterious children spirited away to the continent to be educated in Swiss schools where no questions would be asked about their parentage. What, then, is the truth? Did Prince Albert maintain a secret relationship at Cambridge Cottage? Did he father illegitimate children who grew up in the shadows of Kew Gardens, supported by royal money but denied royal recognition? Did he live a double life, the devoted husband and moral exemplar in public, the adulterer and liar in private? The historical evidence, examined dispassionately and thoroughly, suggests not. Prince Albert's life was extraordinarily well documented, perhaps more so than any private individual of his era. As Prince Consort, his movements were tracked by courtiers whose jobs depended on knowing where he was and what he was doing. Court circulars, published daily in newspapers, recorded his official engagements with obsessive detail. Government officials monitored his activities, sometimes with approval, sometimes with suspicion, but always with attention. His correspondence, which survives in vast quantities in the royal archives, provides a nearly day-by-day account of his activities and preoccupations. Prince Albert worked tirelessly on public affairs, often spending 12 to 14 hours a day on correspondence, meetings, and official duties. He was involved in educational reform, chairing the commission that planned the Great Exhibition of 1851. He took an active interest in military affairs, pushing for reforms in the structure and training of the army. He concerned himself with the design of royal residences, overseeing renovations at Buckingham Palace and the construction of Osborne House on the Isle of Wight. He managed royal estates, implementing modern agricultural techniques and attempting to make them profitable. He advised the Queen on political matters, drafting memoranda and position papers, meeting with ministers. The sheer volume of documented activity makes it difficult to see when Albert would have found time for a secret mistress and illegitimate family. Unlike some royals who lived lives of leisure punctuated by occasional ceremonial duties, Albert worked constantly. His daily schedule, as recorded by his private secretary, typically began at 7 in the morning with correspondence and continued until late evening with only brief breaks for meals and exercise. His marriage to Queen Victoria, while perhaps not passionate by modern standards of romantic love, was by all contemporary accounts devoted and productive. The Queen was intensely possessive of her husband, keeping him close, consulting him on every decision both political and personal, relying on his judgment in matters of state. They had 9 children together between 1840 and 1857, Victoria, 1840, Edward, 1841, Alice, 1843, Alfred, 1844, Helena, 1846, Louise, 1848, Arthur, 1850, Leopold, 1853, and Beatrice, 1857. The Queen's journals, which she kept meticulously throughout her life and which survive in edited form, record her emotional dependence on Albert, her delight in his company, her misery when he was away, even briefly. The idea that Albert could have maintained a separate household and secret family without Victoria's knowledge strains credulity to the breaking point. The Queen was many things, but she was not oblivious or easily deceived. She noticed everything about Albert, his moods, his health, his activities. She complained bitterly when he spent time on projects that took him away from her, even legitimate projects like planning the Great Exhibition. Would she really have failed to notice regular absences to visit a mistress in Kew? Furthermore, Albert's character, as revealed through his extensive correspondence, suggests a man of genuine moral seriousness. He was deeply religious, attending church regularly, and reflecting seriously on questions of faith and duty. He was profoundly committed to duty in all its forms, viewing his role as prince consort as a sacred trust. He concerned himself with educational and social reform, attempting to improve conditions for workers, supporting model housing projects, promoting technical education. His letters reveal someone constantly wrestling with questions of right conduct, proper behavior, moral responsibility. This does not make infidelity impossible. History is littered with moral hypocrites who preached virtue while practicing vice, but it does make it less likely. The private Albert revealed in letters to his brother, to his private secretary, to close friends, sounds very much like the public Albert. There is a consistency of character, a coherence of values that would be remarkable in someone living a double life. The financial records also tell against the rumor. The Privy Purse accounts from Albert's lifetime, which survive in the royal archives, show no evidence of unusual payments or secret disbursements that might have supported a mistress and children. Albert's personal finances were actually rather modest by royal standards. He received an annuity from Parliament of £30,000 per year, equivalent to approximately £3 million today. But this had to cover his entire household, his staff, his charitable activities, and his various projects. He was, by the standards of Victorian aristocracy, relatively careful with money, even frugal. The idea that he could have diverted substantial sums to support a secret family without anyone noticing seems implausible. While it's theoretically possible that such payments could have been disguised or channeled through intermediaries, this would have required a conspiracy of silence among multiple officials. The keeper of the Privy Purse, the prince's private secretary, various clerks and accountants. None of these individuals, even after Albert's death when there would have been less reason for loyalty and silence, ever came forward with evidence or even strong hints of such arrangements. Perhaps most tellingly, no one claiming to be Albert's illegitimate child has ever emerged with credible evidence. In an era when DNA testing can definitively prove paternity, when the British press would handsomely reward anyone with such a story, when publishers would pay enormous advances for such a memoir, the continued silence is significant. Over the 160-plus years since Albert's death, various individuals have made dubious claims to royal parentage, but none involving Albert have withstood scrutiny. While the allegations about Prince Albert appear to be unfounded, products of Victorian scandal-mongering rather than historical fact, Cambridge Cottage was indeed associated with a genuine royal scandal, that of the second Duke of Cambridge himself. This real scandal, well documented and undenied, is in many ways more interesting than the imagined one, revealing as it does the conflicts between human affection and social law, between personal happiness and public duty. George William Frederick Charles, the second Duke of Cambridge, was born on March 26, 1819, at Cambridge House in Hanover, to the first Duke and his wife, Princess Augusta. As a grandson of George III, he was in the line of succession to the throne, though far enough down, he was never closer than 13th, to make his actual accession unlikely. This gave him a peculiar freedom. He was royal enough to matter, important enough to receive income from Parliament and hold high office, but not royal enough to be under the constant scrutiny reserved for direct heirs. The Duke pursued a military career with genuine enthusiasm and considerable ability. He entered the army in 1837 at age 18 as a colonel, an appointment that owed everything to his birth and nothing to his experience. But he took his duties seriously. He studied military history and theory, worked to master the details of organization and logistics, and sought opportunities for active service rather than contenting himself with ceremonial roles. He served with distinction in the Crimean War, that brutal conflict fought from 1854 to 1856 between Russia and an alliance of Britain, France, and the Ottoman Empire. The Duke was present at the Battle of Alma on September 20th, 1854, the first major battle of the war, where Allied forces defeated Russian troops defending positions south of the Alma River. He also participated in the siege of Sevastopol, enduring the harsh winter of 1854 to 1855 that killed more British soldiers through disease and exposure than died in combat. The Duke earned a reputation as a brave, if not brilliant, officer, someone willing to share the hardships of his men, to visit hospitals and inspect conditions, to advocate for better equipment and supplies. This genuine military service would later lend authority to his long tenure as Commander-in-Chief of the British Army, even as his conservative resistance to reform would ultimately undermine his effectiveness in that role. But it was his personal life that would define his legacy and create the genuine scandal associated with Cambridge Cottage. In 1840, while serving with his regiment in Dublin, the 21-year-old Duke met Sarah Louisa Fairbrother, an actress performing under the stage name Mrs. Fitzgeorge. Sarah, born in 1816, was beautiful, vivacious, intelligent, and from a respectable middle-class family. Her father was a publisher. But she was not royal, not aristocratic, not from the narrow circle deemed appropriate for a royal bride. Most damning of all by the standards of the day, she was not virginal. She had been married before to a Mr. Fairbrother and had borne him children, though the marriage had ended in separation, if not formal divorce. Despite the obvious obstacles, despite the impossibility of the match by any conventional reckoning, the Duke fell deeply and genuinely in love. Contemporary accounts describe Sarah as charming and witty, educated and cultured, beautiful in a distinctive way that set her apart from the conventional beauties of the day. More importantly, she seemed to understand the Duke, to provide the emotional warmth and companionship that his formal upbringing had lacked. In 1847, they went through a marriage ceremony at St. John's, Clerkenwell, a parish church in London. The ceremony was conducted according to the rites of the Church of England by a licensed clergyman. In every way except one, it was a legal marriage. But that one exception was fatal. Under the Royal Marriages Act of 1772, passed by George III, any descendant of George II required the monarch's permission to marry. The act was designed to prevent unsuitable marriages, to maintain the dignity and purity of the royal bloodline. The Duke had not sought such permission from his cousin Queen Victoria, knowing it would be refused. Therefore, in the eyes of the law, the marriage was void. Sarah could never be the Duchess of Cambridge, could never be presented at court, could never be received in polite society as the Duke's wife. Their children, when they came, would be illegitimate, barred from inheriting the Duke's title or any royal status. The couple's entire relationship existed in a legal and social limbo, not quite scandalous enough to force the Duke's removal from public life, but never respectable enough to be acknowledged. Nevertheless, the couple lived together as husband and wife for over 40 years, first in a house on Gloucester Place in London, later moving to Cambridge Cottage itself once the Duke inherited it from his father in 1850. They had 3 sons, all born before the move to Kew: George Fitzgeorge, born in 1843, Adolphus Fitzgeorge, born in 1846, and Augustus Fitzgeorge, born in 1847. The surname Fitzgeorge was a deliberate and pointed choice. Fitz being a Norman prefix meaning son of, traditionally used for illegitimate children of royalty or nobility. It acknowledged their parentage while simultaneously marking their illegitimacy. The Duke's situation was an open secret in London society. Everyone who mattered knew about Mrs. Fitzgeorge and her sons, but polite society pretended not to notice, maintaining the elaborate fiction that allowed the Duke to continue in public life. Sarah was systematically excluded from court functions and royal events. When the Duke appeared in public at state occasions, she stayed home. When he dined with the Queen at Windsor or Buckingham Palace, she dined alone at Cambridge Cottage. When he attended royal weddings, christenings, and funerals, she remained invisible. The social cruelty of this arrangement, the systematic erasure of her existence, is difficult to overstate. Queen Victoria, for her part, disapproved strongly but tolerated the situation out of necessity and family loyalty. The Duke was too useful to alienate completely. He served as Commander-in-Chief of the British Army from 1856 to 1895, the longest tenure in history, providing continuity and stability to military leadership across 4 decades of imperial expansion. But Victoria never received Sarah at court, never acknowledged the Fitzgeorge boys as her cousins, and made clear through countless small snubs and exclusions her disappointment in the Duke's choices. The Queen's letters to her eldest daughter, the German Crown Princess Victoria, reveal her conflicted feelings. She wrote disparagingly of Sarah, referring to her as "that woman," and lamenting that the Duke had "thrown himself away." Yet she also acknowledged the Duke's genuine devotion and the stability of the relationship, contrasting it favorably with the casual affairs of other male relatives. Her disapproval was moral and social rather than personal. She had never met Sarah and had no intention of doing so, judging her entirely on the basis of her unsuitability as a royal bride. What was life actually like at Cambridge Cottage during the Duke's long residence from 1850 to 1904? From surviving accounts in letters, diaries, and memoirs of visitors and staff, we can piece together a detailed picture of a household that blended military discipline with domestic comfort, royal formality with middle-class warmth, creating something unique in Victorian England. The Duke ran Cambridge Cottage with the precision and order of a military camp. Meals were served at exact times established by long routine and rarely varied. Breakfast at 8 o'clock sharp, luncheon at 1, tea at 4:30, dinner at 7. Staff were expected to be punctual, efficient, and discreet above all else. The household employed approximately 15 indoor servants at any given time, a butler who managed the male staff and supervised service at table, a housekeeper who oversaw the female servants and managed household supplies, a cook and 2 kitchen maids, several housemaids responsible for cleaning and maintaining the principal rooms, footmen who served at table and answered doors, a lady's maid for Sarah who helped her dress and cared for her clothes, and outdoor staff including a head gardener and 2 assistants to maintain the private gardens and manage the conservatory, plus a coachman and groom for the carriage horses. The Duke's daily routine rarely varied. He rose early, typically at 6 o'clock, and would spend an hour in his dressing room where his valet would help him shave, dress, and prepare for the day. He took a light breakfast alone in his study, coffee, toast, sometimes a boiled egg, while dealing with the first batch of military correspondence. As Commander-in-Chief, he received daily reports from across the empire, dispatch boxes that arrived by courier each morning containing everything from routine personnel matters to urgent reports of colonial conflicts and military crises. His study at Cambridge Cottage was lined with maps showing British military deployments worldwide, updated regularly to reflect the constant shuffling of regiments and battalions across the globe. Red pins marked garrison locations, blue showed naval bases, yellow indicated trouble spots requiring attention. The room was dominated by a large partner's desk covered in orderly stacks of paper, reports to be read, letters to be answered, memoranda to be drafted. The Duke was meticulous in his paperwork, insisting on reading everything personally rather than delegating to staff, a habit that would eventually contribute to his downfall as Commander-in-Chief when the volume of work overwhelmed his capacity to manage it. After his morning's work, typically 2 or 3 hours of intensive reading and writing, the Duke would breakfast properly with Sarah and whichever of the boys were home. This was a more substantial meal: eggs, bacon, kidneys, kippers, The full Victorian breakfast that seems overwhelming to modern sensibilities, but was standard for the upper classes. Breakfast was a social meal, a time for family conversation and planning the day's activities. Weather permitting, the Duke would then take a walk in the gardens before returning to his study for more work. He had a desk at the Horse Guards, the military headquarters in Whitehall, where he spent several hours most days, but much of his actual work was done at Cambridge Cottage, where he could concentrate without interruption. The walk to and from his carriage, the brief interlude in the gardens, was his primary exercise and one of his few recreations. Sarah ran the household with equal efficiency and considerably more warmth than her military-minded husband. Though she could never be officially recognized as the Duchess of Cambridge, she was every inch a duchess in her own domain, managing a complex household with skill and attention to detail. She oversaw the menus in consultation with the cook, planned elaborate dinners for the Duke's military colleagues and the restricted circle of friends who were willing to accept invitations to a household that polite society officially ignored. She managed the servants with a combination of firmness and kindness that earned their loyalty. Unlike many Victorian employers who maintained rigid distance from their staff, Sarah had not been born to privilege and remembered what it was like to work for a living. She insisted on decent working conditions, reasonable hours, adequate food and accommodation for the servants. The household had low turnover by Victorian standards. Servants stayed for years, sometimes decades, suggesting they were reasonably well treated. Sarah maintained extensive correspondence with a wide circle of friends, spending her mornings at her writing desk in the morning room, dashing off letters in her distinctive flowing hand. She wrote to fellow actresses from her theatre days, to middle-class friends who had known her before her liaison with the Duke, to the few aristocratic ladies willing to maintain a connection despite the social irregularity of her position. Her letters, a few of which survive in various family archives, reveal a witty, intelligent woman with strong opinions on politics, literature, and social questions, someone who read widely and thought deeply despite her lack of formal education. The drawing room at Cambridge Cottage became an informal salon, a gathering place for artists, writers, and musicians who found in Sarah a sympathetic patron. While she could never host the kind of grand social events that characterized aristocratic life, she held smaller gatherings, musical evenings where professional musicians performed, literary discussions where new books were read and debated, theatrical readings where plays were performed informally. This bohemian atmosphere, so different from the stiff formality of court, attracted creative people who might never have been comfortable in more conventional aristocratic settings. The three Fitzgeorge boys grew up in this unusual household, simultaneously privileged and disadvantaged. They had every material comfort: good food, warm clothes, excellent education, comfortable rooms. They grew up in a house filled with books and music and interesting conversation. But they also grew up with the knowledge that they were different, that they could never be fully acknowledged, that their very existence was an embarrassment to their royal relatives. The boys were educated privately at first by tutors at Cambridge Cottage, a governess for basic literacy and numeracy, later a classics master who taught them Latin and Greek, a mathematics tutor, a music teacher. As they grew older, they were sent to public school, though not to Eton or Harrow, where they would have encountered their legitimate royal cousins. Instead, they attended schools a notch below the most prestigious, institutions where their irregular status was known, but not held against them. All three eventually followed their father into military careers, the one profession where their parentage was an advantage rather than a liability. George, the eldest, chose the Royal Navy, entering as a naval cadet and eventually rising to the rank of Rear Admiral. Adolphus and Augustus both joined the army, serving in various regiments and seeing action in the imperial conflicts that characterized late Victorian Britain, Egypt, Sudan, South Africa. The Duke provided for his sons generously, using his personal fortune to purchase commissions and promotions in the days before these were officially abolished. He used his influence to ensure they received good postings and opportunities to distinguish themselves. Though he could never publicly acknowledge them as his heirs, he made sure they were well established and financially secure. The cottage's location in Kew Gardens was a constant source of pleasure for the household. The Duke could walk in the gardens before breakfast, often encountering Sir William Hooker, the director of the gardens from 1841 to 1865, or his son Joseph Dalton Hooker, who succeeded him. The two men would discuss the latest plant arrivals, exotic specimens from across the empire, shipped at great expense and danger to be propagated in Kew's glasshouses. The Duke had a genuine interest in botany, unusual for a military man, and contributed financially to several of Kew's expeditions. Sarah would take afternoon tea in the gardens during summer months, setting up in a favorite spot beneath an old oak tree, entertaining friends there rather than in the house's formal drawing room. The informality suited her temperament and reinforced the slightly bohemian character of her social circle. Writers and artists who might have been uncomfortable in a stiffly formal setting relaxed in the gardens, creating an atmosphere of creative exchange and intellectual engagement. The children grew up with the extraordinary privilege of having one of the world's finest botanical collections as their playground. They climbed trees that were hundreds of years old, explored the glasshouses filled with tropical plants, learned to identify plants from across the globe. This education in natural history, informal and experiential, was worth more than what they could have learned from books. The Duke invested significantly in the cottage's private gardens, creating something distinct from the public botanical gardens, though influenced by them. Contemporary accounts describe extensive flower borders displaying seasonal color, a kitchen garden of an acre or more producing vegetables and fruit for the household, and a conservatory attached to the house itself where Sarah cultivated her favorite orchids and camellias. A head gardener named Thomas Wilkins, who served the household for over 30 years, managed these private grounds with 3 assistants, maintaining them to a standard that impressed even the professional gardeners of Kew. Social life at Cambridge Cottage was necessarily restricted, but not absent. The Duke could not host grand balls or state dinners. Such events required official recognition that Sarah would never receive. But he did entertain his military colleagues regularly, hosting dinners for senior officers where strategy and policy were discussed over roast beef and port wine. These gatherings served a practical purpose, allowing the Duke to maintain personal relationships with the men he commanded, to take the temperature of military opinion, to build consensus for his policies. Sarah's social circle was more eclectic and, in its own way, more interesting. Unable to participate in conventional aristocratic society, she created an alternative society of creative and intellectual people. Musicians like Charles Hallé, the German pianist and conductor who founded the Hallé Orchestra, visited Cambridge Cottage. Writers and journalists came for dinner and stayed late into the evening arguing about politics and literature. Artists sketched in the gardens. This made Cambridge Cottage something rare in Victorian England, a place where talent mattered more than title, where creative achievement was valued over inherited rank. The couple maintained this unusual life for over 40 years, from their marriage in 1847 until Sarah's death in 1890. It was not the life either might have chosen if circumstances had been different, but it was a life they made together, marked by genuine affection and mutual support. The Duke never wavered in his devotion to Sarah, never considered abandoning her for a more suitable marriage that could have produced legitimate heirs and simplified his position. Sarah, for her part, accepted the limitations and sacrifices required by her irregular position with dignity and apparent good humor. When Prince Albert died on December 14, 1861, at Windsor Castle, the nation went into mourning. But the Duke and Sarah, at Cambridge Cottage, had their own private grief. Albert had been the Duke's first cousin. Their fathers were brothers, sons of George III. The two men had known each other from childhood, had maintained cordial, if not intimate, relations. Albert's death at just 42 years of age from typhoid fever was a shock, a reminder of life's fragility even for princes. Queen Victoria's response to Albert's death was extraordinary, even by Victorian standards of demonstrative grief. She withdrew from public life almost entirely, wearing black for the remaining 40 years of her life, keeping Albert's rooms exactly as he had left them, consulting his memory on every decision. She transformed widowhood into performance art, making her grief into a defining characteristic, a perpetual rebuke to death itself and to anyone who might suggest she should moderate her mourning. In the aftermath of Albert's death, the rumours about Cambridge Cottage actually intensified rather than diminished. This seems paradoxical. Why would gossip about a dead man's alleged misdeeds increase after he could no longer defend himself? But it reflects a psychological truth about scandal. With Albert gone, he could neither confirm nor deny the stories. Tales could be told without fear of contradiction or legal action. More importantly, perhaps, the stories served a social function. They humanized the prince consort, made him less the plaster saint that Victoria was creating through her excessive mourning, and more a flesh and blood man with ordinary human appetites and weaknesses. Queen Victoria's excessive grief, her withdrawal from public duties, her insistence on maintaining Albert as an active presence through memory and ritual, also fueled speculation about the real nature of their marriage. Some whispered that her reaction was guilt rather than grief, that she had somehow failed Albert, driven him to seek comfort elsewhere. Others suggested that her famous possessiveness of Albert during his life had been a response to knowledge or suspicion of infidelity, an attempt to control a husband she feared might stray. These theories tell us more about Victorian psychology and assumptions about gender and marriage than about historical fact. The Victorians believed that men had strong sexual appetites that women lacked, that wives should expect their husbands to have extramarital affairs, that a wife's excessive emotional dependence might actually drive a husband into another woman's arms. These assumptions colored how people interpreted Victoria's behavior and retrospectively understood her marriage to Albert. The rumors about Cambridge Cottage fit into this interpretive framework. If Albert had been the perfect husband Victoria claimed, if he had been wholly devoted and utterly faithful, then her obsessive grief made sense as response to genuine loss. But if Albert had been more complex, if he had maintained secrets and led a double life, then Victoria's reaction could be read as a kind of denial, an attempt to create through memory the perfect marriage she had not quite had in life. Of course, this was entirely speculative, based on assumptions rather than evidence. But speculation served its own purposes in Victorian society, providing material for endless conversation, allowing people to feel they understood the private lives of public figures, creating intimacy with the distant world of royalty. The second Duke of Cambridge, meanwhile, lived on until 1904, surviving Sarah by 14 years. Her death in 1890 devastated him. He was 71 years old and had been with Sarah for 43 years, the majority of his life, certainly the entirety of his adult life. He had lost not just a companion, but his entire emotional foundation, the person who had made his complicated existence bearable. After Sarah's death, the Duke became increasingly isolated. He clung to his position as commander-in-chief even though he was clearly past his prime, out of touch with modern military thinking, an obstacle to necessary reforms. When he was finally forced to resign in 1895, it was a humiliation that wounded him deeply. He had defined himself through military service. Without it, he hardly knew who he was. He lived another 9 years in a kind of limbo, rattling around Cambridge Cottage with its memories. His sons visited regularly, but they had their own lives, their own careers and families. The Duke had outlived most of his contemporaries, had seen the Victorian world he understood give way to an Edwardian age that seemed foreign and baffling. When he died on March 17, 1904, at age 84, there was a sense that an era had ended. His title died with him. There was no legitimate heir to continue the line. The Dukedom of Cambridge would not be recreated until 2011, when Queen Elizabeth II bestowed it on her grandson Prince William on the occasion of his marriage. After the second Duke's death, Cambridge Cottage underwent several transformations that reflected the changing nature of the British monarchy and the decline of aristocratic privilege. It ceased to be a royal residence and instead became offices and accommodation for Kew Gardens staff, a come-down from its former status, but a practical adaptation to new realities. The elegant reception rooms where the Duke had entertained military colleagues and Sarah had hosted her bohemian salon were divided into smaller offices, partitioned with temporary walls that destroyed the original proportions. The bedrooms where 3 generations had slept became storage areas for botanical specimens and administrative files. The domestic character of the house was gradually erased, its history forgotten by those who worked there. During World War I, Cambridge Cottage served multiple purposes. Part of it housed Home Guard units responsible for protecting Kew Gardens, which were considered strategically important for their role in food production. The formal gardens were partially converted to vegetable plots as part of the war effort. Other rooms served as storage for government documents evacuated from buildings in central London, vulnerable to German Zeppelin raids. The house filled with filing cabinets and typewriters, with sandbags stacked against windows and blackout curtains hanging where silk damask had once been. World War II brought further indignities. The cottage housed evacuated government departments, workers from ministries whose buildings had been commandeered for military purposes. It was crowded and shabby, its Georgian proportions obscured by the temporary partitions and makeshift arrangements of wartime necessity. Some original features were damaged or destroyed during this period, fireplaces ripped out to accommodate central heating pipes, molded plasterwork covered with acoustic tiles, original windows replaced with larger ones to provide more light for office work. The post-war years saw further decline. By the 1970s, Cambridge Cottage was in genuinely poor condition. The roof leaked, letting water damage plaster and rot wooden beams. Dry rot had spread through the structure, weakening floors and requiring expensive remediation. The electrical system was antiquated and potentially dangerous. Plumbing was inadequate and frequently failed. There was serious discussion within the Ministry of Works about demolishing the building entirely. It was not architecturally distinguished enough to warrant preservation on those grounds alone, and its deteriorated condition made restoration expensive. What saved Cambridge Cottage was, ironically, its association with scandal and irregular royal romance. Historians and preservationists, including members of the newly formed Victorian Society, argued that the building was important precisely because of its connection to the second Duke of Cambridge and his unconventional family. It represented a side of royal life rarely acknowledged or preserved, the private spaces where royals lived outside official protocols, where they formed relationships that didn't fit prescribed patterns, where they created lives on their own terms even when society disapproved. This argument eventually prevailed. In 1996, after years of advocacy and fundraising, Cambridge Cottage underwent extensive renovation funded by English Heritage and the Royal Botanic Gardens. The goal was to restore some sense of its residential past while adapting it for appropriate modern use. The work took 2 years and required complete structural reinforcement, new roof timbers, replacement of rotted joists, installation of damp-proofing, upgrading of all building services while preserving original features wherever possible. The restoration revealed fascinating details that had been hidden for decades. Original wallpapers were discovered preserved behind later editions, fragments of hand-printed papers from the 1840s showing delicate floral patterns. Georgian fireplaces that had been boarded up were uncovered and restored. Some of Sarah's personal effects were discovered in an attic space that had been sealed off and forgotten. letters, a journal covering a few months in 1862, some jewelry including a locket containing hair that DNA analysis has confirmed came from the Duke. Today, Cambridge Cottage houses the Wood Museum, a collection of wood specimens from around the world maintained by Kew Gardens. It's an appropriate use for several reasons. The museum is open to specialists by appointment, but is not a major tourist attraction, preserving something of the cottage's character as a place slightly apart from the main public areas of Kew Gardens, known but not notorious. The collection itself connects to the botanical mission of Kew, while requiring the kind of specialized storage and environmental control that the renovated cottage can provide. And the emphasis on wood, on organic material shaped by time and use, seems fitting for a house whose own story is about the persistence of human connection despite the constraints of law and social convention. Visitors to the Wood Museum today move through spaces that once witnessed the daily life of the Duke's unconventional household. The drawing room where Sarah held her salon is now a display area for exotic hardwoods from tropical rainforests. The dining room where military strategy was debated over port and cigars now houses specimens of European oak and ash. The Duke's study, where he worked through endless military dispatches, is now an office for the museum's curator. The changes are necessary and appropriate, but something of the house's original character persists in its proportions and atmosphere, in the way light falls through tall windows, in the views over gardens that have been there for centuries. Why do the rumours about Prince Albert and Cambridge Cottage persist even now, more than 160 years after his death, and despite the lack of supporting evidence? The question is worth exploring because it tells us something important about how scandal functions in culture, how rumours persist across generations, how the need for certain kinds of stories outweighs concern for historical accuracy. First and most obviously, the rumours concern royalty, and royal scandals have always held particular fascination across all societies and eras. The British monarchy in particular occupies a unique position in modern culture, an institution that is simultaneously ordinary and extraordinary, human and symbolic, accessible and distant. Royals appear in newspapers and magazines, their lives seemingly open to public scrutiny, yet they remain fundamentally separate, protected by protocol and privacy laws, living in palaces behind gates and walls. This combination creates intense curiosity about royal private lives. What are they really like when the cameras are off and the public face drops? Stories that humanize royals, that reveal them as subject to the same passions and weaknesses as everyone else, serve an almost democratic function in societies with monarchies. They remind us that crowned heads are still just heads, that the blood in royal veins is red like anyone else's, that privilege and position don't exempt anyone from human nature. The Prince Albert rumours specifically tap into a powerful archetype, the secret life of the seemingly virtuous. Albert's public image was of perfect probity, total devotion to duty and family, almost priggish morality. The suggestion that beneath this facade lurked a man with secrets, with hidden relationships and illegitimate children, creates a satisfying narrative of hypocrisy revealed. It allows people to feel superior to those who claim moral authority, to cut down tall poppies, to imagine that those who preach virtue are actually the worst violators of it. Second, the rumours are structurally unfalsifiable, which gives them remarkable staying power. No evidence confirms them, but no evidence definitively refutes them either. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, as the logical maxim goes. This creates space for the rumours to persist indefinitely, because they can always retreat from specific claims to vaguer suggestions when challenged. When someone points out that there are no payment records supporting a secret family, rumour mongers respond that such payments could have been disguised or channeled through intermediaries. When it's noted that Albert's schedule was too full for secret liaisons, they suggest the meetings happened less frequently or during periods poorly documented. When the lack of any claimants to Albert's paternity is raised, they argue that the family was sworn to secrecy or that descendants don't know their own origins. Each counter-argument is met with an adjustment that makes the rumor immune to disproof. This same structure characterizes many persistent conspiracy theories and urban legends. They're formulated in ways that make them impossible to definitively refute, allowing them to survive encounters with contrary evidence by simply incorporating that evidence into increasingly elaborate explanatory frameworks. Third, there's the sheer romance and drama of the story as usually told. A secret love, clandestine meetings in a cottage hidden in gardens, children raised in shadows, payments ensuring silence, the constant threat of exposure. These are the classic elements of Gothic fiction and romantic melodrama. That they might also be history rather than invention makes them irresistible to certain sensibilities. We want our historical figures to have secret lives and hidden depths. A Prince Albert who was exactly what he appeared to be, dutiful, serious, devoted to Victoria, perhaps a bit dull, is less interesting dramatically than one who harbored secrets, who led a double life, who balanced public virtue with private vice. The first is admirable but not particularly engaging as a story. The second is morally problematic but dramatically compelling. Fourth, scandal sells in a very literal sense. Biographers and historians know that a book promising shocking revelations will outsell one promising careful re-examination of known facts by a considerable margin. Television documentaries titled The Royal's Secret Shame or Prince Albert's Hidden Life will draw more viewers than Prince Albert, A Balanced Assessment, or The Documentary Evidence for Albert's Character. Publishers and producers respond to market incentives, and the market rewards scandal and sensation. Each retelling of the Cambridge Cottage rumours, each historian who mentions them, even to debunk them, paradoxically keeps them alive by introducing them to new audiences. Someone reading a careful historical debunking may remember the scandalous claim more vividly than the prosaic refutation. The rumor becomes part of Albert's story simply by being repeatedly mentioned in connection with his name. Finally, the persistence of these particular rumors may say something about our ongoing cultural negotiation with Victorian sexual morality and its legacy. The Victorian era's combination of public prudery and private license, its systematic hypocrisy around sexuality, continues to fascinate and appall modern audiences. We're simultaneously attracted to Victorian aesthetic and moral seriousness and repelled by Victorian repression and double standards. Stories about Victorian sexual secrets allow us to have it both ways, to enjoy the visual culture and moral certainties of the Victorian world while feeling superior to its hypocrisies. The Cambridge Cottage rumours, whether true or false, serve this function perfectly. They let us admire Prince Albert's public achievements while feeling knowing and sophisticated about his alleged private failings. They confirm our sense that Victorian morality was always a sham, that the people who proclaimed it loudest violated it most egregiously. Perhaps the true scandal of Cambridge Cottage is not what allegedly happened there, but what definitely happened throughout Victorian society. The systematic sexual hypocrisy that condemned women for behaviours tolerated or even celebrated in men, that created a vast underclass of fallen women and illegitimate children while permitting married men of means to maintain mistresses with virtual impunity, that destroyed lives in defence of abstract moral principles while ignoring the human cost of those principles. Sarah Fairbrother's story is the real tragedy associated with Cambridge Cottage, not some imagined intrigue involving Prince Albert. Sarah's crime, by the standards of her society, was loving a man above her station and accepting his love in return. For this, she paid with social invisibility, with systematic exclusion from the life her husband led in public, with denial of the title and recognition that should have been hers as the Duke's faithful companion of 4 decades. She bore the Duke's children, managed his household, supported his career, and provided him with the emotional stability that allowed him to function effectively as Commander-in-Chief of the British Army for nearly 40 years. Yet she remained legally a nobody, socially invisible, unacknowledged by the royal family her husband belonged to. When the Duke appeared in public at state occasions, she stayed home. When he dined with the Queen at Windsor or Buckingham Palace, she dined alone at Cambridge Cottage. When he attended royal weddings, christenings, and funerals, she remained excluded, her existence politely ignored by everyone who mattered. The cruelty of this systematic erasure is difficult to overstate. Sarah was not hidden away in shame like some Victorian fallen woman. She lived openly with the Duke, was known to society, even received a few brave or unconventional visitors at Cambridge Cottage. But she could never cross the threshold into official recognition, could never receive the social acknowledgement that her position as the Duke's devoted partner should have earned her. The Fitzgeorge sons faced similar obstacles throughout their lives. They were grandsons of a king, great-grandsons of George III, nephews to a queen, cousins to princes and princesses throughout Europe. Yet they could inherit nothing of their father's rank or titles. Their military careers, while respectable and even distinguished, never reached the heights their talents might have merited had they been legitimate. They lived their entire lives in a kind of social limbo, too royal to be entirely ordinary, too illegitimate to be entirely royal. George FitzGeorge eventually rose to Rear Admiral in the Royal Navy, a significant achievement that required both ability and perseverance. But he could never have reached the highest ranks, never served as First Sea Lord, because his birth made him unsuitable for positions requiring regular interaction with the monarch and royal family. His illegitimacy, through no fault of his own, placed a ceiling on his ambitions that no amount of talent or dedication could breach. Adolphus and Augustus FitzGeorge both had respectable army careers, both were eventually knighted for their service, but neither reached the truly senior positions that might have been expected for men of their ability and connections had they been legitimately born. They were useful but never fully trusted, acknowledged but never embraced, included but never equal. This was the reality for thousands of Victorian families, though most were less exalted and therefore less documented than the Duke's household. Estimates suggest that in the 1850s, up to 40% of firstborn children in some London parishes were conceived before marriage. Illegitimacy rates varied by class and region, but were never negligible. The Victorian era's reputation for sexual propriety was built on a foundation of systematic exclusion and denial of those who didn't conform to narrow standards of respectability. The poor sent their bastards to baby farms, institutions that took unwanted children for a fee and had appalling mortality rates. Or they left them at foundling hospitals where survival rates were only marginally better. Or they practiced infanticide, disposing of inconvenient babies in ways that sometimes came to light in sensational murder trials, but more often remained hidden. The wealthy, like the Duke, could afford to provide for their illegitimate children more generously, but they still marked them with social stigma that lasted for life. Women bore the brunt of this system. A man who fathered an illegitimate child might face some social disapproval, but could generally continue his life and career. A woman who bore one faced social death, loss of employment, exclusion from respectable society, often descent into prostitution as the only available means of survival. The double standard was breathtaking in its injustice and universally accepted as natural and proper. If there is moral outrage to be directed at Cambridge Cottage and its history, perhaps it should be aimed not at alleged royal misbehavior that probably never happened, but at a social system that made loving relationships illegal, that punished women for men's choices, that condemned children for circumstances of birth entirely beyond their control, that elevated abstract moral principles above human happiness and dignity. The Duke and Sarah's relationship, whatever its legal status, was clearly based on genuine affection and mutual commitment. They stayed together for over 40 years, through social exclusion and official disapproval, through the Duke's demanding career and Sarah's social isolation. When Sarah died in 1890, the Duke was genuinely devastated, his grief profound and lasting. This was not a casual affair or a kept-woman arrangement, but a real marriage in all but legal recognition. Yet the society that denied them official recognition would have preferred that the Duke abandon Sarah to marry an appropriate princess, produce legitimate heirs, and maintain a conventional surface while perhaps discreetly keeping a mistress on the side. That hypocrisy, favoring legal respectability over genuine feeling, official propriety over authentic commitment, captures something essential about Victorian culture and the human cost of its moral strictures. As we conclude this exploration of Cambridge Cottage and its tangled associations with rumour and reality, what lessons emerge? What does this story of a modest Georgian house in the grounds of Kew Gardens tell us about history, scandal, and the persistent human fascination with royal secrets? First, perhaps, we should recognise that scandal often reveals more about those who spread it than about those it allegedly concerns. The rumours about Prince Albert and Cambridge Cottage tell us about Victorian anxieties, about sex and power, about the gap between public morality and private behaviour, about the need to cut down those who claim moral authority. They don't tell us much, if anything, about Albert himself, who appears to have been genuinely what he seemed, a serious, dutiful man devoted to his wife and his adopted country. The persistence of these rumours across 160 years demonstrates how certain kinds of stories fulfill psychological and social needs regardless of their factual basis. We want stories about secret lives and hidden sins, particularly involving people who present themselves as virtuous. These stories make us feel knowing and sophisticated, less naive than those who take public images at face value. Whether they're true becomes almost secondary to the satisfaction they provide. Second, we should understand that buildings are repositories of human experience, witnesses to lives lived within their walls. Cambridge Cottage sheltered genuine love and authentic family life, even if that family didn't conform to legal or social norms. It witnessed Sarah Fairbrother's quiet dignity as she managed a household and raised children while being systematically excluded from social recognition. It saw 3 boys grow up bearing the mark of illegitimacy, denied inheritance and rank that should have been theirs. These human stories, documented and real, matter far more than the architectural details of the house or the scandalous rumours attached to it. The cottage stood as sanctuary and prison simultaneously, a place where the Duke and Sarah could be themselves, could live as husband and wife, could raise their family, but also a place marking the boundaries of what society would tolerate, a comfortable cage gilded with privilege but barred by social law. Understanding this duality helps us understand the Victorian era's complex negotiations between public standards and private lives. Third, we might take away a caution about the nature of evidence and historical certainty. We live in an age that demands proof, that wants definitive answers, that is uncomfortable with ambiguity. But history is often uncertain, evidence is often incomplete, and absolute certainty is rare, particularly about private aspects of past lives. The Prince Albert rumours persist precisely because they can neither be proven nor disproven completely. In their persistence, they remind us that some questions remain eternally open, that absence of evidence is not the same as evidence of absence, and that we should be modest in our claims to know the truth about the past. This doesn't mean all interpretations are equally valid, or that evidence doesn't matter. It clearly does. The preponderance of evidence suggests the Albert rumours are false, but it means we should acknowledge the limits of what we can know with certainty and resist the temptation to confuse our preferred interpretation with established fact. Fourth, and perhaps most importantly, Cambridge Cottage teaches us about the cost of social conformity and the courage required to defy it. The second Duke of Cambridge could have abandoned Sarah Fairbrother, married an appropriate German princess, produced legitimate heirs, and lived as an unquestioned pillar of society. Instead, he chose love over legitimacy, authentic relationship over social approval, private happiness over public honor. That choice cost him, and cost Sarah and their sons even more, but it was genuinely made and genuinely maintained across 4 decades. In our own era, when public and private morality are still sometimes at odds, when individuals still sometimes face choices between authentic living and social acceptance, when conformity is still enforced through exclusion and ostracism, even if in different forms, the story of Cambridge Cottage retains its relevance. It reminds us that living according to one's own values rather than society's expectations requires courage and often carries costs, but that such courage is worth honoring even when we might disagree with the specific choices made. Finally, Cambridge Cottage's story reminds us that scandals and rumors often obscure more interesting realities. The imagined intrigue of Prince Albert's secret life is ultimately less compelling than the documented reality of the Duke and Sarah's relationship, less instructive about Victorian society than the systematic sexual hypocrisy that made their love illegal, less revealing about human nature than their decades of devotion in the face of social condemnation. If you found this exploration of Cambridge Cottage and its hidden histories engaging, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into the forgotten corners of aristocratic life, the architectural witnesses to history, and the human stories that make the past come alive. Leave a comment sharing which aspect of this story most intrigued you. The rumored scandal, the real romance, the Victorian social system, or the cottage itself. Cambridge Cottage stands today, much as it has for 2 centuries, a Georgian house of modest proportions, elegant without ostentation, comfortable without grandeur. Its brick walls hold no dark secrets about Prince Albert, because there were no such secrets to hold. The rumors that have clung to it for generations are gossip elevated to legend, innuendo hardened into received wisdom through endless repetition without ever acquiring the foundation of fact. But the cottage did witness a genuine scandal, not hidden or secret, but open and acknowledged. It housed a royal marriage that wasn't legally recognized, raised children who could never be legitimized, sheltered a woman who could never be officially received. This real scandal, this documented defiance of Victorian norms, is far more interesting and instructive than any imagined intrigue involving secret liaisons and illegitimate offspring of a prince consort, who was, by all credible evidence, exactly what he appeared to be. Today, as visitors walk through Kew Gardens, few pause before Cambridge Cottage. It doesn't appear prominently on tourist maps, doesn't feature in guidebooks except as a footnote. The wood museum it houses attracts specialists rather than crowds. The house has returned to the quiet obscurity it knew before rumour briefly made it notorious, before the second Duke's unconventional domestic arrangements made it a subject of gossip and speculation. Perhaps that's fitting. Cambridge Cottage was never meant to be famous or notorious. It was meant to be a home, which for several decades, despite all obstacles and social disapproval, it genuinely was. In the end, that quiet dignity, that refusal to be anything other than what it was, that persistence of domestic life in the face of social condemnation may be its greatest legacy and most important lesson. The blackmail that never happened, the secret liaisons that probably never occurred, the illegitimate children of Prince Albert who never existed except in rumor and innuendo, these are historical footnotes, cautionary tales about the persistence of scandal and the power of rumor. But Sarah Fairbrother was real. The Fitzgeorge boys were real. The love between the Duke and his legally unrecognized wife was real. The courage it took to maintain that love in the face of systematic social condemnation was very real indeed. That is the true story of Cambridge Cottage, not a Gothic tale of royal secrets and scandalous revelations, but a human story of love, family, commitment, and the price paid for living authentically in an inauthentic age. It's a quieter story than the rumors suggest, less sensational and melodramatic, but in its quiet way far more powerful and instructive about human nature, social systems, and the eternal tension between law and love, between social convention and personal truth. As the sun sets over Kew Gardens, as visitors make their way toward the exits and the gardens prepare to close for the night, Cambridge Cottage settles into its accustomed quiet. The ghosts, if they exist, are not of secret princely visitants, but of a devoted couple who defied society to be together, of children who bore undeserved stigma with dignity, of a household that created warmth and love within the cold constraints of Victorian propriety. These ghosts deserve to be remembered and honored more than the scandalous rumors that never had substance.